This is Men Who Pause, a Borderlands podcast. Midlife is a crossroads. For some, it's a slow unraveling. For others, it's a chance to break free, to find meaning, to chart a new course. But evolution doesn't happen in the comfort of the familiar. It happens at the edges. This podcast is our probe into these edges. A search for what's relevant, what's deep, and ultimately what's real. We're here to light a fire in your mind, to show you what's possible when you step outside the ordinary. I'm Kasai, and alongside Mayank, I co-created Borderlands.
While Kasai guides men through transformational work, I focus on the practical, building a structure that lets those transformations actually happen. Together, we're bridging the two worlds, the demands of modern life and the wisdom of deep experiential work. This podcast is an extension of that. It's where we together explore ideas and practices that push boundaries, provoke thought, and ultimately spark change. Today, we are privileged to have with us Gurcharan, a man who has spent a lifetime at the crossroads of power and philosophy. A graduate of Harvard, he led Procter Gamble India as CEO before heading global strategic planning for P&G Worldwide. He lived and worked in 4 different continents. Then, at the height of his career, he walked away, left the boardrooms behind him to write, to think, to ask the questions that haunt men in midlife. He's the author of 9 books, including the acclaimed trilogy on dharma, artha, and kama, duty, wealth, and desire. His memoir, Another Sort of Freedom, traces his own reckoning with success and selfhood. He has written for the New York Times, Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, and used to pen a regular column for the Times of India.
At the height of his midlife crisis, he recognized, and I quote, "We are just a speck in the universe. Why then take yourself so seriously?" At 82, he is still searching, still writing, still wrestling with the questions that define a man's life. Today we sit with him to talk about ambition and surrender, about the masks we wear and the ones we shed, the tension between making a living and making a life. How does one live both wisely and adventurously? Welcome, Gurcharan. So happy you're with us.
Thank you for having me.
So it's no secret that you've lived multiple lives. You've been a philosopher, a successful businessman, and a writer. Looking back, have you seen a particular thread that's running through it all? What's your origin story? I'm really curious about that.
My mother kept a diary. I appear on page 17. She's calling me a restless baby. 6 months later, I have become a difficult child. A year later, a troublemaker. At the age of 3, I learned to run, and I've been running ever since, and often running into myself. They gave me the name Ashok Kumar, but my grandmother suspected that my mother, her daughter-in-law, had given me that name because she was secretly in love with the Bollywood actor named Ashok Kumar. That wouldn't do. So she took me to her guru, placed me at his feet, and she said to the guru, "Guruji enu na deo, give this boy a name." And he, seeing me at his feet, called me Gurcharan Das. Overnight, I was transformed from the Prince of Happiness, Ashok Kumar, to the humble servant of the feet of the Gurcharan Das. Some years later, when I was grown up, I asked the guru, "Why did you give me that name? Ashok Kumar was such a nice name." And he says, "It's good to be reminded about humility." And then he gave me the very best definition of humility that I have come across. And it was to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously. And this I've used as the dedication of my memoir to the happy few who don't take themselves too seriously. And around this time, I was put in kindergarten in Lahore. And when the term finished, I came home sporting a green report card. My mother was at the door, and she looks at me and says, "Did you stand first?" My father is behind her, not far, and he says to her, "That was the wrong question. Ask him what he likes doing in school. Does he like to draw? Does he like stories? Who are his friends? And what engages him?" So that was the moment when I first realized the difference between what my mother's obsession was, making a living, and my father, who was an engineer, but also a mystic, who was much more relaxed, and his theme was making a life.
Like most young Indian students, you decided to pursue engineering. You got into Harvard engineering, and then you switched somewhere early on to philosophy.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
We were at the Palam airport in Delhi, and the Air India flight is waiting. My mother's got tears in her eyes. They're saying goodbye to me. And between her tears, she's saying, "Now make sure you study something useful. Why don't you become an engineer like your father?" Engineers would always get a job in India. When I arrived at Harvard, I wrote engineering as my major, and I had a roommate who was studying Russian literature.
Mm-hmm.
And he was reading Anna Karenina of Tolstoy.
Okay.
And one day at lunchtime, he says, "Gurcharan, if you have an affair with a married woman, it should be someone like Anna Karenina." And then he starts spouting all the virtues of Anna Karenina. And I'm thinking, good God, man, here I am calculating pipe friction and mugging up Bernoulli's equation. And this guy is dreaming of sleeping with Anna Karenina. Something is wrong here.
Yeah.
And so I went promptly to the dean's office, struck out engineering, and from the next semester, guess what I studied? I studied Greek tragedy, Roman history, Bauhaus architecture, Renaissance painting, Beethoven's music. I even took a course in Sanskrit love poetry. And when my mother heard that I was studying Sanskrit at Harvard, she went into a depression and she says, "Hi, mera munda." And she says, "A dead language, only the dead will give him a job." Anyway, my father then had to reassure her that, look, he's making a life through books. There'll always be time to study something useful. I continued in this merry way, flitting from history to economics to philosophy, etc., until even Harvard got worried. And the dean called me and he says, in my junior year, "Son, you got to declare a major. What will it be?" And I said, "Philosophy." And he said, "Why philosophy?" I said, "I want to learn to be happy." He says, "That makes sense. Nobody's ever given me that answer before."
Mm-hmm.
And so I graduated in philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
You graduated newly minted philosopher. How did you end up philosophy at Harvard to selling consumer
Vicks
goods?
Vapor Rub.
Vicks Vapor Rub.
That summer I was home. I had got into Oxford when I graduated for my PhD. One day I got cold feet. I remember I was in a park. I was lying down looking at the clouds. And I asked myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
I quietly wrote off to Oxford saying I'm not coming.
Mm-hmm.
And when my mother heard about it, her worst nightmare came true. She had a grown-up son at home, what we say in Punjabi, vela. He was absolutely idle. And we had a nosy neighbor in Chandigarh. She would always ask, thoda munda ki kar rahe? What is your son doing?
Yeah.
And my mother would get very embarrassed each time. She said, Manu to pata nahi. I said, this is wrong. I can't give her so much trouble. And so I answered the first advertisement I found in the newspaper. It was a company that made Vicks Vapor Rub. I applied and I got in. I don't know how I got in because I didn't have a clue. I suppose they got impressed with my Harvard degree. But suddenly I'm transported from the ivy-covered halls at Harvard into the dusty bazaars of India, going for my sales training. I'm asking dealers, chemists, pharmacies, ek dozen, ek free, kitna mangta hai? It was a different life, but there it was.
That's amazing. We will fast forward now to about 30 years in your life. Another inflection point, I quote your memoir, Another Sort of Freedom. In the chapter, The Mask Falls, you talk about this incident when you hit your midlife crisis. The lunacy of my situation hit me again. A grown man in a starched shirt with a pointless piece of cloth tied to his neck like a dog collar, going to work day after day to sell a few more cases of Vicks, oil of Olay, and Pantene shampoo. All good products, but there is a limit. Is this what life is all about? I asked myself. So Gurcharan, my question to you is, what is the answer? What is life all about?
Certainly many people in their 40s go through a similar question. Frankly, it's not about finding yourself and finding life. It's about creating yourself and creating a life. Most of us sleepwalk through life and we do what is expected of us. We study hard, we clear exams, then we go to a university and we do exactly the same thing. Then we get a job, then we get married, we have children, and we don't question our life at all. We are not like Mozart, who at the age of 3 knew he was a musical genius. And from the age of 3 to 31, he died at 31. He wrote the most magnificent music. It came just naturally. Most of us actually stumble through life. So it's really about living an examined life. In my case, it was triggered at that moment in Cincinnati, Ohio. It was the headquarters of Procter Gamble. I was responsible for global strategic planning. That day, there was a meeting on Pampers. The global team, Latin America, Europe, Asia, R&D people, saying that these are our plans, these are the upgrade, improved product, yay, wo. And there I was looking out the window and realizing that is this how I wanted to spend the rest of my life?
There's a certain kind of surrealistic, Dali-esque quality to this moment you described. Looking out the window, people talking about diapers, you're wondering what this piece of cloth is around your neck. I know that when you're looking back and as you write about it in your memoir, it fits into this arc. But in that moment, it must have felt absurd, discontinued, like you're just in the wrong place, something like that. Sometimes we feel like this kind of narrative of our life that doesn't make sense at some points.
The reality is that life is absurd. It has no inherent meaning. I have not been fortunate to have the gift of faith where I would have said it's God's will and you're doing God's will. As an agnostic, you do face this question. If life is then absurd, why am I spending it selling so many cases of Vicks, coming to the office in a starched white shirt with a tie? It just felt so unreal. I could tell that it was a mask I was wearing. It was a performance in the theater that was going on. And suddenly I had a desire to pull the curtain. And I didn't want to have anything to do with this performance. I didn't quite know what I was going to do. But I wasn't going to be part of this. We are playing many parts,
Yeah.
as Shakespeare says.
Right.
This is the part I was playing. That's why the chapter is called The Mask Falls, because suddenly you face yourself.
Mhm. Mhm. I want to go into how you made your decision, because you were flying high, a managing director at P&G Worldwide, and you chose to take early retirement and pursue full-time writing. What lessons can you share with many of our listeners who are very successful but unfulfilled and trying to figure out what's next?
I liked the rough and tumble of business life, deal making, etc. I liked all that. But there was a part of me that was unfulfilled. I could see the limitations of that life. And it was my father, again, who said to me, "You're lucky you work for a multinational company
Mm-hmm.
and they respect your weekend. Why don't you do what you like on the weekend?" It started as a hobby. I still remember Sunday morning, I said to myself, I'm going to write a play. And then to give myself josh and confidence, I said, it must have been a morning like this when Shakespeare too sat down to write Hamlet. Now, sane people don't talk like that. But then at that age, you have the confidence that you can conquer the world.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a play called Larin Sahab at 22, 23.
Right.
It
Yeah.
won a big prize, Sultan Padamsee Prize,
Yeah.
all the big writers,
Right.
Kushwant Singh, Raja Rao and all had written for this.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow I won it.
Okay.
And so I was lucky. And then it was performed not only in Bombay, with theatre group, Alec Padamsee and all those guys, but it was performed in the UK. Oxford University Press published it.
Right.
And then I did the same thing with the second play, which was called Meera on Mirabai.
Yeah.
You know, the Rajput
Saint, yeah.
poetess, and nobody would touch that play. I went
Right.
around from theatre to theatre and so on. But one woman at the theatre called La Mama, she says, it speaks to me, honey. It speaks to me. and she got this director who set Meera bhajans to hard rock music. And it became a musical.
Wow.
And it was spectacular. I didn't realize what theatre could, how a director could transform some words that I had written.
It sounds like you were a pretty successful 22-year-old or 28-year-old. By the time you got to the midlife crisis moment, you had a pretty solid side gig, right? You had already cultivated the seeds of a second career.
Yeah.
And you just had to switch lanes, in a sense.
Yeah, in a sense.
For people who don't have that, investment bankers, lawyers, people who have been on the grind working 80-hour weeks and have not had that time to cultivate it, what advice would you have for them? Can they still do it if they didn't start in their 20s?
This problem of discontent in the middle of your life is very common. I think that, look, in your 40s, if you realize this, we live up to, and so we have a long life now, much longer than before. And we can start doing something else. And moreover, you don't have to quit your job, as I did, to become a writer, full-time writer. I'd been a weekend writer. You can start at any time. And the important thing is to take a few risks. It's almost like taking out an insurance policy. You're going to face it. But there are the 30%. I said 70% hate their work, but the 30% like it. I had a colleague in my own company who loved his job. An amazing fellow named Kamble. He was a Maharashtrian. He came from Akola district. Real Dehati comes to Bombay for the first time. And the guy is so excited to work. And he's like a curious child. You know how a child is.
Right.
If it's raining, all the adults put on raincoats, carry an umbrella, and there's a puddle on the road. They all go very gingerly around it. What does the kid do? he jumps right into the puddle. That's really the kind of guy Kamble was.
What was his role?
He came as a night watchman, a guard, and in the night shift. He wasn't a graduate. He was metric pass, and he was serving, in the second day, serving coffee around to everybody while he's doing his rounds. Then he discovers the telex machine the next day. We used to send telexes to each other in the 80s. And so he realizes he must learn English because you need for telexes. So he makes himself learn English. During the daytime, he has a night shift. So he learns English, and within 6 months, he's sending trial telex messages. And I could go on and on.
Yeah.
But the point is, this guy would have paid us to come to work.
Right.
That was the sense of the love that he had for his job. And he was good at it. He had the quality of being helpful to people. In the evening shift, after 6 months, if you had a problem of any kind, you say, ask Kamble. He'll solve your problem.
Right.
Then our telephone operator decides to go on maternity leave. She was having a baby. And this guy goes to the head of personnel and he says, look, why don't you make me your temporary telephone operator? I'm tired of working at night. And the guy says to him, are you crazy, Kamble? We are a multinational company. You don't even know English well. How will you be our telephone operator? And so poor Kamble goes back with a long face. And I hear about this incident, but I also know that Kamble has become a legend in the evening shift, so much so that more and more people are staying at work because of this. Anyway, every few years, we put him in a new job and he just excels at it. Suddenly, as a role model, he changes the ethos of that group, and finally he ends as a director of the company.
Wow.
Now, here's a guy who loves his job.
Right. That's a very interesting story. It is whatever you love and excelling in life, but not just for the sake of anything, but really finding what you're truly passionate about, what you love. So I want to probe a little bit into something else that you've shared with us, that you loved, your love for India. Like there were multiple times that you had an opportunity for a plush expat role in the West, which would have maybe paid you multiple times what you got in an equivalent role in India. Just curious what drove that decision making, and for quite a few of our audiences who would be expats, Indian expats living overseas and maybe contemplating whether they should come to India, come back to their roots or not. Can you share some of your life experiences and decision making process?
I never had a doubt in my mind about that. I somehow knew that I would have to come back to India. And also, the fact is, I know many people, Indian expats, who are abroad, and I see their lives, and they're still interested much more in politics in India. They're living in the US or UK or wherever. They know more about what's happening, whether it's Modi or whether it's Sonia Gandhi. They will be much more interested. And so they're living a mimic life. It seems that they're physically but their heart and their mind are at home. And for me too, it was always like that. When I quit my job, I could have lived anywhere in the world. We had enough savings to be able to live anywhere. But it was a no-brainer to come back because I was interested in what was happening in India. And in fact, the trigger point really was a radio broadcast on what is called NPR radio, National Public Radio. And there I heard a radio report where, on the way to work, where they were saying that the reforms were in trouble. Now, for me, 91 was
the Indian economy.
Liberalization.
There was a moment of liberalization. In fact, I felt we've got our true independence not in 1947. We got it in 91 when we got economic freedom. And for the first 40 years, we had actually sacrificed 2 generations of our country, young people who could not get a job, or the only decent jobs were in the government. There was no real competitive private sector. And for me, that was the thing. But and I think it's not unusual for many people to feel that way. And I wanted to be home and I wanted to participate in the process. And I had met Manmohan Singh at one point. He was a junior guy in the finance ministry when I met him in the 80s. Now he was the finance minister of Narasimha Rao's government. He'd been the big guy who had done the reforms and so on. Just when I was thinking, my wife was questioning, I'd explained to her our expenses, etc. She was still not very happy. And so I shot off a telegram to him and I said, why is nobody defending the reforms? And he, surprise to surprise, he actually answered back. And he says, you come back and you write about it. And because I'd already started writing op-eds in the papers by then. So he also knew me from that role, my weekend writer role.
Yeah.
And that was the trigger in my case that I had to be involved with the destiny of India in some ways.
I just want to ask you a tactical question. You said a little earlier that you knew you had enough. That calculus for people, like what is enough in terms of, okay, I've saved some money, you're used to a certain lifestyle, and that monthly paycheck won't come anymore. So what advice do you have for people who might ask what is enough and how do you determine that?
That's a very private question. It's a very right question that you've asked me. And the fact of the matter is that what I told my wife is that, look, now our standard of living is not going to go up. But I hope that it won't go down too much. And I'm not sure she liked that answer, but that's how it is. You have to realize that your needs are limited. Once you realize that, then that makes it easier to cope.
I can relate to this question because, like you, I've moved continents, I moved countries. Just last year, before actually starting Borderlands, when my last startup, when I was exiting from the whole calculus, and obviously now Google Sheets and all the formulas are there. Me and my wife going through our investments, our savings in India, overseas, everything. But that anxiety, that nervousness never goes away. So absolutely, I agree with you. It's a personal question, right? For somebody, maybe a Mercedes is a minimum requirement. For somebody, maybe a scooter is good enough, both means of transportation. But how can you help our audience maybe come to some sort of a conclusion, or at least some sort of a heuristic way that they can do that calculus for themselves and come to a reasonable conclusion? If they are able to answer that, they will actually be able to pursue the life of their dreams and hopes that I'm sure they've written in some sort of a vision board, but don't have the courage to go forward with.
I'm not sure how helpful I can be, but I can only say that one was to realize your needs are limited. The second point is that you, in the calculus of trading off, it's a trade-off, right? And in that trade-off, the question that you have to answer is you have to put your own fulfillment, your sense of making a life, as my father used to put it, that life is not only about making a living. Life is about, human beings, we have a number of capabilities. And when we fulfill some of those capabilities, our potential, that is the source of ultimately living a flourishing life. And in fact, as you, when you're introducing me, you talked about the goals of life. And I've written 3 books on the 3 goals. And now the 4th one is moksha. On freedom. And I guess once you take that trade-off, and that maybe my standard of living is not going to go up anymore, but if I can manage within maybe not a Mercedes, but a normal sedan
Mm-hmm.
will do. At that time, the car was a Steam. Maruti Esteem was the car.
Right.
I had a
Yeah.
Mercedes, I had a Jaguar,
Yeah.
but when we started out here, I had an Esteem,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess you have to really want it also. And
Mm-hmm.
if you want it, then a lot of the hesitation goes away.
Okay.
It's how much you want something. And as I said, I was lucky. I had the confidence of having had a weekend. I was been wearing a weekend hat in case of, it was a writer, but it could be a stamp collector. It could be whatever your hobby you want to make it. I'm not sure I'm being very helpful to you, but I guess it is about reorienting
Yeah.
your priorities. Really, you think of it. You come out of a doctor's office
Mm-hmm.
and he's told you you've got 3 months to live. Now, how are you going to live in those 3 months? You're not going to start an executive MBA program, right? If I have just 3 months to live, every moment counts. And it brings you to the present.
Mm-hmm.
And so what in that present will give you a little bit of a high? That's really all it's about. So to realize what is it that gives you a high.
Mm-hmm.
And it need not be consumption. It can be production of some kind also.
I want to ask you a question. You studied philosophy, then you took a hard left and worked in the corporate world.
Hard right,
Yes,
actually.
yes,
Yeah.
right, that's right. A
Yeah.
hard right.
Hard right.
I didn't become a Marxist.
Yes, you took a sharp turn, let's say.
Right.
You had 30 years or so in the corporate world, and then you went to writing full time. In a way, it seems like that middle business part was discontinuous or need not even have been there. You could have been a philosopher and then been a writer. What did your time in the business world teach you? Do you think it's played a part in your success as a writer and as a philosopher?
I'll answer by telling you about my routine. When we left America, I returned my green card and I came back. I was free. For the first week or so, I enjoyed the fact that I could have a nice cup of coffee in the morning, sit down, write letters to friends,
Mm-hmm.
and I sought pleasure, and I wasn't in a rush. But then very quickly I realized that this life of pleasure, if you will,
Leisure, pleasure.
leisure is a better word. Listening to music, reading a little bit here and there, lingering over the newspaper. It was a very short-lived experience. So what I learned was the discipline that work had taught me, that going to be a writer was just as serious a pursuit as going into a corporate job.
Mm-hmm.
You had to have a time, fixed time to do it. And so my routine from the beginning has been that I get up at around 5:30. By 6, I'm pulled like a magnet from my bedroom to my study. I write from 6 to 12 every day. I don't do email. I don't do social media. I don't read the newspaper. I don't even answer the phone.
Mm-hmm.
I don't meet my secretary in the morning.
What about a little meditation, yoga, walk?
I don't do yoga, meditation, walking. I don't want anything to come in the way of my agenda. All these things, especially emails, put you on somebody else's agenda. And so that really is the difference between how I was at work before and how I am as a writer. As a writer, I very quickly get into what I'm writing, and what I'm trying to get at is that one of the symptoms of knowing that you love doing your work is when the self disappears.
Mm-hmm.
It's not me. It's somebody who's punching the keys, lettering is appearing, sentences are appearing on the monitor. And there's no person who is there at all because I just forget myself. It's much like Tendulkar when he approached his double century, famous one, the last one. And the reporter asked him afterwards, how did it feel like? And Tendulkar says, I don't know. I wasn't even there. By then, the ball had become so big and the bat had become so big that the bat was just hitting the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel that's the secret of that, you know, that you are so absorbed by something that even time gets distorted. Suddenly it's noon and I think, oh my God, feels like it was 9:30 or so in the morning.
Yeah.
So for 2.5 hours, you weren't even there. And that is the test. That can you be absorbed in something so deeply that you're not even aware of yourself.
Hmm.
This is the art of self-forgetting. This is the art of making a life.
Good words to
Yeah.
remember.
That is very interesting that you talk about flow, and we all strive for that. And I guess most of us struggle with that also. And I'm sure you have your fair share of bad days as well. What do you do on your bad days? How do you get back into this state of flow?
You asked me what has business taught me before I became a writer.
Yeah.
The business taught me that a certain discipline,
Mm-hmm.
that you don't go when you if you have a job, you don't go to your desk and you don't say that today I'm not in the mood. In other words, it's writers also create a little bit their own methods of dealing with time. A Somerset mom used to take a shower in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
then dress up with a starched white shirt
Mm-hmm.
and a 3-piece suit, spit polished shoes.
Right.
Where was he going? To his study to write for the next 8 hours, not see a soul. He had to wear his suit, etc., because that was the uniform that he had adopted. In my case, it's kurta pajama, which I slept in.
Right.
And only after 12 do I think of taking a shower or doing anything else. But because I was so afraid, people give you advice when
Yeah.
you're unemployed.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, why don't you do yoga? Why don't you do
Yeah.
this, etc. I also think that when I quit the corporate world, I thought I would actually become a better human being. Because businessmen get bad press. They're supposed to be rapacious and so on. But actually, I found that business people are, in fact, better human beings than even writers or artists or such other professions.
That's
And
interesting.
the reason is, it's counterintuitive, but the reason is the business person instinctively depends on others.
Mm-hmm.
The business person has to have customers, and you have to satisfy your customer. Even Ratan Tata would bow down to his big customer of his Jaguar or something. The fact of the matter is that a business person has not only customers, suppliers to whom he has to be fair. You're tempted to always squeeze your supplier. And if you squeeze him too hard, you get a component that will off specs and you'll get hurt. Your own product will get hurt.
Right.
Or employees. You have to respect your employees. Because if you don't respect them and you don't have a fair way of making promotions in your company, good people will leave you.
Right.
So what I'm saying to you is that a writer doesn't depend on anyone. He doesn't depend on anyone. He just writes for himself.
Sure.
And so you lose, in fact, being good to another human being. And so I personally think that businessmen don't deserve that rap, actually. And writers and all shouldn't be put on that pedestal.
Sure.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
A few months ago, when my book first came out, and this is the one after this, it's called The Dilemma of the Indian Liberal. I went to Khan Market. I live not far away from there. And there's a famous bookstore called Bari and Sons in Khan Market. And I found that I looked in the window and my book is not there. So I go charging in and I said, look, you know I'm an important writer
Yeah.
and you haven't put my book in the window. And so he gingerly says, I'm sorry, puts one copy in the...
Right.
I said, no, not in the back, in the front.
Yeah.
So the ego
Yes. Yeah.
is always there.
Yeah.
And ultimately, another sort of freedom is a freedom not taking yourself too seriously, taking your work seriously. We all want to be somebody. But that somebody, we all think, what I'm going to have for dinner is really the most important thing tonight. There are 8 billion people. What about their dinner? And as we said earlier,
We are a speck in the universe.
we're a speck in the universe. And why am I making myself so important in all this?
I just want to go back to a conversation we were having before this interview in Kusai's backyard, which really caught my attention because absolutely you talk about routine, getting into the state of flow. That is critical. But you said that it's not just on a regular day, even on your vacation, you're out there from that 6 to 12, your writing time is sacrosanct. And clearly must mean that your family is very supportive. There must have been some arm wrestling or some negotiation because I'm sure a lot of our listeners, they have kids, they have busy jobs, they have spouses getting pulled in different directions, the different roles they play. So how do you balance all this stuff to get that state of flow, get your priorities, but at the same time, be a family man, be a society man, and fulfill all your obligations?
Got it. Yes, there are days which are difficult. And yes, you have to be you have to be selfish. But I think this is what my wife actually realized when on weekends, my friends played golf and I wrote, and she just got used to the fact that if I didn't, and even now, if I don't write a paragraph or two any day, I become a very difficult person. I fret so I think it's more self-preservation on her part that she says, look, I'll sacrifice these 6 hours to have a guy who's civilized in his behavior. And it's a deal that we all strike in our personal lives. I've been fortunate. My wife and I have been married now for 55 years. And she's 80. And frankly, my sort of definition of happiness is, one, to love the work you do, and two, to love the person you live with. This makes life very much easier. But I've also now realized there's another definition of happiness, and that is to fulfill the capabilities we have for artha, dharma, kama, moksha, the purusharthas of the ancient civilization we have. And so I think, in a sense, to keep the peace, she's also imbibed this idea that what I'm doing is fulfilling some of the capabilities that I have. It's always a trade-off. And it doesn't mean that it's been hunky-dory.
Yeah.
We, like any couple, we fight sometimes. But overall, it's been all right. It's been a good ride, I would say.
Yeah.
As you said, you have been lucky. It sounds like things have somehow fallen into place at the right time for you. You've had success in your career. You got into Harvard. You became CEO of your company. At 22, you wrote a play which was performed and critically well received. And then your books have done very well. You have publishers pursuing you. So you've always had success or fame. It seems like only a few people are so lucky. And if you were writing books and they didn't sell that much, and in your old days you were
Bitter.
pottering around your garden, maybe not. Is it necessarily bitter? Another way of asking this question is, who are you beyond what the world knows as you and the roles you play? And beyond, even at 82, what are the masks left? What can you acknowledge? What's still left to drop?
Good philosophical question. Yes, I'm very conscious that I've played different parts in my life. And I've been lucky that I did them well. Whether it was doing philosophy or whether it was in my corporate world. And I had my share of breaks. To say that I have achieved that state of humility that the Guru taught me when he gave me my name, I have not achieved that. As I told you the story about going to the bookshop and insisting that my book should be in the window, that's still there. But I can only say that the ambition is there. Ambition to write another book is there. But I have been able to diminish a little bit the ego. Krishna taught Arjuna in the Gita about nishkam karma, that act for the sake of the deed, act for the sake of the action, and not for what is in it for you, not your personal reward. Kamble was that kind of person who was able to do that. I can't. But I can only say, and frankly, for most human beings, I'm convinced, the idea, it's very idealistic. The ego just won't shrink that far. Just like the Marxist dream of total equality, it's a wonderful idea. It's a great aspiration. But the human ego, as we learned in the Soviet Union or in China, that the ego won't shrink that far. But it's a good idea to shrink it a little bit, just for your own sake. If you're stuttering about self-importantly always, people think you're a bit of a fool. And self-importance is not a nice thing. So at least I'm conscious, even though I have not achieved it, I'm conscious. And ultimately you have to, since you realize in our consciousness, Buddhists teach this idea very well. You're aware of thoughts going through your head, emotions going through your mind. But you can never find in your consciousness the person who's having those thoughts. So that's why they posited the no self, Anatma.
Yeah, because the emotions, all of these are transitory, right? They're ephemeral, and therefore you don't identify with them.
Part of me does now think of my life as wearing different masks on a different day, playing, whether you're meeting a customer or in a job, you put on a different mask. And you keep shedding those masks, you're giving different performances come to an end, and you begin another performance.
It's like a sobering and, in a way, freeing idea. Perhaps behind those masks, there is nothing. It is only masks.
Yeah, that's right.
That's giving me goosebumps thinking about that.
But is there a real Gurcharan behind the mask?
That's it. I don't think that even a legitimate question, I don't think, because there is no You try to close your eyes. You'll have thoughts going through your mind.
Right.
You'll have all these emotions running through. The only way you know that it's the same person from now or from yesterday is your memory. Your memory reminds you, oh yes, I did it. That means there must be a continuing self in the process, but it's very tentative.
Like an onion, as you're peeling the layers away.
And there's
Let's say there's
nothing
mask,
inside.
and then underneath there's another mask,
Another.
and then you're unearthing these masks, and maybe there's nothing
Yeah.
else.
It's a continuous journey of.
It's a continuous.
It's a
unfolding,
continuous journey
yeah.
of peeling the layers of the onion, I guess.
So it's then sobering to realize that if you're playing all these roles, you're not the guy who became CEO. You're not the guy who's been a best-selling author. There's been somebody performing out there,
Mhm.
and the performance is going to be over when soon you'll die, and that's it. And so it's up to you then to make sense of what your life is. So you're writing your script, frankly.
You've
So,
written a
thank you.
good one, I
Thank
think,
you.
and thank you for inspiring us and tracing this kind of arc of a very interesting lived life, balancing these, making a living, making a life, a career, and deep kind of intellectual inquiry. And it's inspiring for all of us. And it's journey not in the mind, it's a journey in action. And as we come to a close, it reminds me of what we are also trying to do at Borderlands, which is not just a journey in the mind, but something that is through doing, through movement, breathing, music, finding your edges, challenges, and aligning almost these different aspects of your life, your intellectual center, your passion and where you feel connected, and also your kind of instinct, right? And being open to these influences and trusting yourself. You've helped remind our listeners that you can make big changes in your life. You can make transitions, and it's not just for the young, right? Even in the middle of your life, you can make a change and make a go at it and make it count.
Just think, if you have only 3 months to live, how will you live those 3 months? And you'll stop doing a lot of things that you think are so important. To give oneself a pause, to look at one's life. In fact, that's been the nice thing about writing my memoir, Another Sort of Freedom. There's a difference between an autobiography and a memoir. And I tell my friends to write a memoir. Why? Because in an autobiography, basically you are telling the story chronologically of your life. I was born here, I went to school here, I got married then, and etc., till the end. In a memoir, you try and find a theme that defines your life. That who are you? And one day you're trying to connect the dots, the big things, the milestones that you've talked about today. You try to connect those, and one day you say, aha, so that's who I am.
Yeah.
Now, what could be more rewarding to discover who you are?
Yeah.
You don't have to publish it, but the process of living your life, you have to relive your life.
Yeah.
And I tell you, one thing I've learned, to reliving your life is better than even living it.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're
can
playing
define
God.
it. Yeah.
You
No,
know?
and Gurcharan, this is great. We started with the probe into how could we live more wisely and adventurously. And what I'm taking back from it is really just looking back at your life, asking that question, who you are, seeing it as a memoir, relive it.
And remember that the day consists of moments. How you spend your moments is how do you spend your day. And a life consists of days. So how you spend your days is how you spend your life. So you might as well do it with some pause, some examination. That always helps.
Then life is not a series of rules to follow, but it's something that is alive and created by you, right? You create your life.
That's right.
It's a different path for everyone, and it's a lot about finding your own path and searching within yourself, right? And things seem to fall into place when you do that in some somewhat magical way.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's great.
Thank you.
Since we recorded our podcast, we have announced the dates of our next 2 retreats. Both of them are immersive journeys with a team of world-class facilitators. Our 3-day retreat runs from June 19th to the 22nd. It's a high-impact espresso shot for the man looking to get his mojo rising. Our 7-day retreat begins August 26th. It's a deeper dive for the man in transition, looking for his next move. Come if you feel called to.